Then let's fight for it.
G'day guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I am in the podcast setup, but I'm going to be doing a spoiler-filled review of WandaVision, the latest Marvel Studios installment. And so if you have not seen the WandaVision and you have not finished it, this is not the video for you. Finish the show. I do recommend watching it. Finish it, then come back and enjoy this discussion. And I have brought on a fellow Marvel enthusiast to discuss it with me. Sam Eastgate, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I've been asking to be on here for a long time.
Yes, I say it has been a long time coming. And what better time to start with WandaVision? Because this was a show that was very, very strange, but I think it was entertaining for a lot of people. And I feel like it definitely landed in a lot of respects. Would you agree?
I think, yeah, absolutely. As the first foray into TV for Marvel, they will count it as a definitive success. It's... Fan engagement has been incredible, and I think people overall enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, it was a strange sell too, because this show is very much so a love letter to American sitcoms, and the way that it went through from the 50s all the way up until, you know, the early 2000s, and kind of address all these various decades and basically put this sitcom spin on the Marvel universe, I thought was very interesting. And that sort of pitch, I think, is so strange and so weird, but because Wanda and Vision are two very strange characters with a very strange relationship, I feel like it worked. And the justification they gave to a lot of things I thought was also really interesting.
Yeah, it's certainly a weird one to do as the first TV. I believe it wasn't intended to be, but with COVID and everything, it is on the weirder side, but I think the reaction has shown that people trust Marvel and absolutely lapped it up from what I've seen online.
It's funny you say that, because you're correct that WandaVision was not the original premiere for Disney Plus with Marvel. It was supposed to be Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but then because of COVID and stuff, and WandaVision is a slightly easier to show to film than what I assume Falcon and Winter Soldier will be, because that's a very action-packed epic sort of thing. Whereas WandaVision is a sitcom, which is a lot easier to film. So obviously timelines got shifted around, and originally we would have had WandaVision and then we would have gone straight into Doctor Strange. But again, a lot of movies are still yet to come out with Black Widow and Eternals and stuff. So again, the whole Marvel schedule has changed, but regardless, I think WandaVision was actually, in retrospect, a actually really good start and launch pad for Phase 4.
I think, yeah, it sets up a lot of stuff moving forward. And
because it's really drawn back in the audience now, because everyone's like, I want to see what happens next with Doctor Strange and obviously these characters that we've met. So it'll be interesting to see it continue now.
Yeah, it was a really good show for that fan engagement, because of the amount of, I guess, theorizing that it opened itself up to, a lot of open ends, a lot of unanswered questions in every episode that kept the audience engaged, meaning that it made itself very sort of brought in an active audience rather than just sitting and watching.
Yeah.
Everyone was thinking about it. There was so much to dissect and look into in every episode.
You're 100% right, and that's such a good thing. But the flip side of that is that sometimes it can lead into things that we don't expect. And we're going to get into that, because why I brought you on is because I think we both think very similarly towards Marvel. However, I think we might have a difference of opinions with some things. And how we're going to go out throughout this review is we're going to go through each episode and kind of slowly build ourselves up to the finale. And then we'll kind of do a deep dive reflection on the whole series after that. But yeah, I'll say the finale was definitely interesting. But we'll work ourselves up to that. Obviously, starting with episode 1, the episode was called Filmed Before a Live Studio Audience. It's set in the 50s, and it's very much so reminiscent of like the Dick Van Dyke Show and that type of style. And seeing Wanda and Vision in this kind of black and white situation where they've just recently been married, and they've got this whole scenario where Mr. and Mrs. Hart are coming for dinner, but Wanda doesn't know that, and like the whole miscommunication I thought was hilarious. What do you think of the first episode, the first introduction to the show?
I think that certainly the first first episode and the second, as they were released together, was sort of... I know a lot of people felt disappointed because of the slightly slow opening, but I feel like it was just because they were fully throwing themselves into that sitcom reality before they started picking up and setting up all these pieces
for the MCU larger
in
universe,
general.
yeah.
They wanted to go in and do this story in this sitcom world, and they really dove into that immediately.
They embraced it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it was actually filmed in front of a live studio audience.
It was, yeah.
Which is very cool. And I loved that sort of more contained story. Just those two actors who were nailing it. And obviously we're a bit young for remembering the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Of course, yeah. Well, I'll talk about that in a second, yeah.
But it felt very sort of genuinely in that style rather than sort of paying homage to it. It felt like they were just writing it as if it was one of those shows, which really worked, I think.
Well, that was a big sticking point for this whole show, was how good technically the show was. The fact that they were able to encapsulate each decade and make it feel so of that era and make it feel so reminiscent of so many shows from that era, like Malcolm in the Middle for the 90s or Bewitched or whatever. Like, there were so many different shows that you could clearly tell they were referencing, and it just totally felt like that. Like, the first two episodes, which are set in the 50s and the 60s, that whole black and white nature, it so felt like that. Like, obviously, I'm a bit young, like you said, to obviously have watched a lot of those older shows. But it was still one of those things, like, I felt like, yes, this is of that time, and it made sense for these characters, even though they're from, modern times, it still somehow worked. Like, watching Vision as this, like, kind of busy dad who's, got to go out and do work, and then, Wanda, who's this, like, stay-at-home mom who's getting to know her nosy neighbor Agnes. It just all worked, and it shouldn't work. Like, this show on paper should not work. It's ridiculous. It's so weird. These two characters are so crazy, and their relationship is so strange. On paper, this should not work. But again, it's a testament to how good Marvel is, because they know their characters and they know their craft so well that they were able to nail this extremely wacky concept so well.
Yeah, they really really nailed it. I felt like, particularly with things like the effects and stuff, that they fully went with the different feels of the different eras they were in. I think I was noticing that, in those early couple of episodes, Wanda's using her powers as she normally does, but even in the black and white, there's none of the visual,
visual stuff. Yeah,
it was just wiggle and then poof, it's there.
Yeah, and when Vision does, like, the transformation of his face, is like the little sparkle effect in the sound effect.
It looked totally 50s, and they completely almost stripped all of the normal Marvel visuals out of it. But I like that they didn't, even though they were fully committing to being in this 50s sitcom style, they did take the opportunity to make a few jabs at that. And I think that was sort of the only thing in those early episodes that was sort of tweaking that it's wrong, by using those sitcom tropes. So the one that comes to mind is Vision going, "What does our company do?"
Yeah.
Which is sort of the first hint that something's not quite right here, but is also a nod to all those sitcom families, and you look at these jobs and no one actually describes what they do.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I love how Vision works at a computational service, because, like, that's what he is. He's like an android, computer-related job. It just made so much sense.
All the times that people are like, "You're like a human computer," he's like, "Absolutely not."
Yeah, it was just so funny because it was so tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, the comedy of them trying to hide their powers itself was quite amusing, very amusing, and sort of that sort of set its own plot in those early episodes of the sort of tension of them trying not to be discovered, even though we didn't know why that was the case.
There was definitely a lot of mystery at the beginning of the show, and it kind of sets up a lot of stuff for you to be like, why is it this way? Is this real? Is this an alternate reality? And I feel like once we get into when Jimmy Woo and Darcy get involved, that's where we get a lot more fan questions inside the universe. But one thing that from the first episode that I thought was quite interesting, and I don't know if it was intentional, but you know the part where Wanda gives that little meat tenderizer to Vision, and then Vision picks it up. I thought that was like a little reference to Vision being able to pick up Thor's hammer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you picked up on that as well.
I didn't think of it at the time, but I did. I saw it somewhere later when I rewatched a couple of the episodes and went, "Oh, that's funny."
Yeah.
Again, it's just those little details that Marvel always nails so well.
Because it's so subtle. Because if you don't realize it, then it's not a big deal. But if you kind of like pick up on what they're referencing, then it's kind of funny. So.
Yeah, it's good to. They're the best sort of details that you don't lose anything if you miss it, but you get a little something if you get it. Like to everyone else, to most people, that was just a funny joke about Vision not knowing what the hell he's doing in the kitchen. But obviously to the audience, it's that plus, hey, look, remember the hammer thing?
Yeah.
Haha.
Exactly. And it's that's what Marvel does so well, is that they, incorporate their references and their Easter eggs so subtly, but for those who know what they're looking at, they're able to appreciate it so much because it's like, oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
And you kind of get like a second level of enjoyment out of just what the initial story is.
Yeah, that's something Marvel's nailed all the way through, is being able to have play both sides of satisfying your diehard fans with all these different Easter eggs without alienating general audiences. There's nothing in there that they miss if they don't know, but if you do know, you get something extra. So they've really, I think that's probably part of why they're so successful, is because they have that appeal to such a wide audience, with both levels of enjoyment for different people.
And the first episode ends with this very strange off-kilter, and this is what I love about the show, is that it uses the film language in order to communicate its story, and it does that through the aspect ratio changes and just the camera movement and style. Like obviously with those old classic sitcoms, it was very much so set up in a way where you have the stage and then the camera's on one side, and you get very much so a left to right kind of single profiles, and you don't really get that over the shoulder type shot. So at the end of that first episode, where we have this traditional sitcom where they're at the table and Vision is talking but the camera still doesn't cut to him front on, but then you have like a sort of glitch in the simulation, and you have Mrs. Hart say, stop it, and she keeps repeating it, but then you actually realize that she's saying that to Wanda.
Yeah.
And that sort of glitch in the system was like really interesting, because at the time we didn't know what was going on, but as you soon find out what's going on, it makes so much more sense as to why she was saying that, because it's like, wow, she's really trying to communicate to Wanda through this simulation that's glitching out, because she only has so much control over these people. Yeah,
I think that way they managed to play it very close to the chest and just do the sitcom sort of style for those first couple of episodes, but still managed to use that to start planting the seeds, was really good. And it's one of the reasons that people kept coming back to it so much, because even when it was just the tiniest tidbit inside what is generally just a really good show anyway, makes that combination really powerful, and you keep people in with that combination of just generally. I think I saw somewhere that went, if this was just a sitcom in the 50s, it would be a really good sitcom because it's really well made.
Exactly.
Plus you plant those tiny seeds, and that's a really good combination to keep people engaged.
And obviously this continues us into the second episode, where we get this kind of off-kilter improvisation magic show, and Vision obviously kind of swallows a bit of gum, and that kind of stuffs up how he works and stuff. I thought that was a really fun way of kind of telling this story and showing this old-timey animation with it as well. I thought was quite clever.
Yeah, totally. Again, totally playing into the era they were using. That also in a Disney Plus family-friendly show, but still having a drunk dad gag. That magic show is one of my favorite parts of the entire series.
It's so funny.
That's so good. And Paul Bettany is so good. I think that's one of the things that's come out of this show, and I've seen a lot, was just Paul Bettany has been great as the Vision and Jarvis all the way through, but I think in this he got room to really flex himself, and he's a phenomenal actor, and he's nailed it all. And that was one of those. I love that sort of drunk comedy. They're always hilarious.
Well, actually, let's shine the spotlight on the acting overall, because you mentioned Paul Bettany, but even Elizabeth Olsen, I thought was so phenomenal in this show, and it was really a testament to how talented those two are as co-leads, because you're going through these separate decades, and each decade has a very distinct style and feel with the performances, and the acting back then was obviously so different to what it is now, and obviously they were paying they were paying homage to so many different things, and I think Elizabeth Olsen her performance was so good because it was so distinct for each time period, but deep down you could still see that the Wanda Maximoff that we know was in there. And to see her play within this, reality that she had created for herself, this perfect world, it was fantastic. And I was blown away by how good the performances were, especially by Elizabeth Olsen, but also Paul Bettany, because in the movies, we've seen Vision as a very robotic kind of analytical presence who was very standoffish and kind of wooden in a sense. But in this show, he got to flex his acting muscles and really show a side to this character that we hadn't seen before, and that wouldn't really make sense within the MCU world, but through the sitcom world, it makes so much sense.
And those two together, I think also the chemistry between those two is so natural, and really, it sort of again really plays into that sort of sitcom vibe. The chemistry between the two leads. Again, also in that episode of the sort of the bumbling dad and the mum who's got to come in and save and knows what's going on, is in control. Both worked well with those two actors doing really well, and also I think plays into the overall feel of Vision not quite knowing what's going on and Wanda being in control. So you sort of expand that dynamic that you find in a lot of old sitcoms, that also makes sense in across the whole series. Works really well for me, I think.
Yeah, because the whole beekeeper scene at the end was really interesting, because when that happened, it was an inside look to what was really going on inside this world, where we have the rewind, and it really showed that this isn't a sitcom. This is somehow someone's in control, and at that stage, it was quite clear that Wanda was in control, and it was definitely interesting to see all those sort of little moments come into play that kind of gave us little nuggets of information that we could kind of feed on and try and speculate on to see what's happening, who's in control, how's this happening. And we obviously have the moment with Jimmy Woo where he's like, who's doing this to you, Wanda? But, we find out later that it's actually Wanda who's the one who's created the simulation. Were you kind of on the page of it was Wanda all along, or were you thinking there was someone who had nefarious objective at play?
I think I originally was totally on board with it being Wanda, because I know a bit more about comics. I'm not a huge comic fan, but I like reading about them. And it just made sense. She's the only one with that sort of power set, and it leans into stories that we've had in the comics. I did like the sort of uncertainty around that, but I think originally I did originally just go, yeah, that's Wanda, but it was not the who, it was the why and who else is involved, that were left open to speculate and to think about.
Well, because Agnes was, I think, suspicious from day one.
Absolutely.
She was definitely one of those characters that was like, what's up with her? And that moment in episode 3 where, they have all of the people in the town up on the board with their real identities in there. And then you have Agnes and her profile, and it didn't have anything.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things that's like, that's strange. If she was from the town, they would be able to identify her. So from that point on, I feel like there was definitely something like, all right, who is she? What is she doing? And obviously all the hardcore comics people were speculating that she was Agatha Harkness, that it ended up being. And they were very faithful to her origin story from the comics as well, which I was very appreciative of.
Yeah, I think they didn't try and cover that up too much, from back before the show started, when casting came in. It was Kathryn Hahn as Agnes, and people were going, that is suspiciously close to Agatha.
Yeah.
which again, I like that they didn't completely try to cover it up. She was always suspicious, and they lent into that. Again, it's not you don't have to have the entire thing be a twist. It's the details, the how and the why, and what role is she playing. Yeah, we know she's suspicious. They're not trying to hide that. It's the details of that that become interesting.
And the reason I asked you, if you were wondering if it was Wanda all along, was because one of the speculations that I had and so many people on the internet had was whether the character of Mephisto from the comics, who is basically the devil, whether he was involved somehow in this story. And obviously we've discovered that he isn't involved. And that was interesting because in the comics, Mephisto plays a role with Wanda specifically where basically Wanda makes a deal with Mephisto and he grants her children. Yeah. And we obviously see that in episode 3 that she has twins. And then obviously from there we have the House of M story where obviously Wanda basically goes insane because she loses her children, and then we lose mutants and all this crazy stuff. There was so much potential from the story, and they were leaning quite heavily into a lot of this stuff. So when fans speculated that Mephisto might be involved, I think that was a fair guess, but the show didn't go in that direction. So I was interested to see if they would address it, but they didn't. So I'm intrigued to see whether they address it later on at all, and whether it'll be a thing that comes back, or whether the Marvel Universe just won't address Mephisto at all.
That's playing into later stuff, and I don't know if we want to talk about that now or so till when we get there, but that end credit scene at the end, I think Mephisto was a good guess. I also was very, I'd say, keen, interested to see if Mephisto was involved. Again, I think he plays a really interesting role in a lot of comic storylines.
Yep.
And is quite a reasonable sort of sized player in the Marvel universe in the comics. I'm sort of glad that they didn't, particularly as we got later towards, the later it got, it was like, this is going to be harder to bring in, particularly because, again, they're playing to the non comic background audience as well. Mm-hmm. And the Mephisto reveal would be sort of a big thing
it would be a huge moment for the MCU.
For the MCU and for like comic fans, but to everyone else, it's most people. He's not a sort of a well-known outside the sort of the hardcore fan base. He's not a very well-known name generally. So using that as the big reveal, I think probably wouldn't have worked the same way for a lot of people as it would for perhaps you and me and other people.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm not. I think they've left the door open enough that we're not done with this yet. But
100%, yeah.
But I agree with you. It was very much open to speculation, and Mephisto was definitely one of the possibilities.
Well, he was my prime suspect from day one. Like I was like, I know this happens in the comics. When they revealed that she was pregnant at the end of episode 2, it was like, okay, so they're going into the children.
Yeah.
And then episode 3, we have this crazy episode. We transition from the 60s into the 70s, and we're now in color. And this was a fun transition, that seeing them now in color and kind of that old grainy film type look that they had. Yeah. And obviously Wanda, as she goes throughout this pregnancy, is just shit's hitting the fan. And it's like, what's going on? Everything's like going out of control. And then she has the twins. And I thought that was actually a really heartfelt moment between Vision and Wanda, where he says, names the first child Billy. Yeah. When he wanted to name him Tommy. Have I got that the right way around?
She wanted Tommy, I think, and he wanted Billy.
Yeah. That was it. So I feel like him naming the child that Wanda wanted to name it first, before they knew that was twins, was like a nice moment for them. Oh, and then when they revealed that the twin was coming, I was like, that's really funny. Yeah. Even though I was expecting
We knew that they were twins. Yeah. Especially once that first scene when they're discussing the names. I think a lot of us went, haha, you'll get both. You can both be happy. That was a fun episode. I really liked that.
It was a fun episode, yeah. And the ending definitely opened up the door to so many more possibilities and speculation.
Yeah. Again, I like the comedy of Vision, like freaking out over this pregnancy, like reading books and sort of trying to go through all the trying to learn as much as he could because he has no idea.
He's a
what
worried father. Yeah. I love that stereotype. It was really well played with him. Yeah. And another thing I need to praise about this show was that, you know, the costuming and set design was also fantastic across each decade. You know, as soon as you got to the 70s, it felt so 70s. And just with the hairstyles and the costuming and even the set design, like what I found was interesting about this show, how it was each episode, the architecture of the house changes.
That was going to be my next point.
Like
What does this house actually look like?
Yeah, like the basic foundation was always the same, but like there'd be a staircase here one episode, and then the kitchen would be slightly different the other episode. And I thought that was interesting because, again, it played into each decade because obviously, you know, architecture and appliances and furniture all obviously, you know, improves over time. And I thought, again, just each time it felt so much of that time and that era that I was like, it felt so seamless. And it's almost as if you didn't even realize that, like, this is a show because it just felt so natural. And again, I have to give praise to the costuming and set design team because they did so well with the visual aesthetic of the show.
Yeah, it's amazing how much the architecture of the houses really sort of set itself in the era that they're in. You don't realize how closely those two things are tied.
But one of the little things that I noticed in this episode, only having watched the penultimate episode, was the doll that Vision is practicing on, practicing the nappies and stuff.
Yeah.
That same doll is the exact same doll from the Brady Bunch episode that the little girl has. When we have the flashbacks in episode 8, and Wanda's going through her history, and you can see her watching the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
That episode that they show, that doll that she has is that exact same doll that Vision is working on. So again, that's just a little thing that they've obviously plucked from Wanda's memory, and then that's a thing that she's incorporated into the simulation because she's thinking of the Brady Bunch in that moment. And I thought that was just a really fun little nod that, again, is so subtle, but if you understand the reference and you kind of pick up on that, I appreciated that because as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's cool.
And it really builds the whole sort of atmosphere of it's all dredged out of WandaVision's mind, Wanda's mind. Sorry. It's all just parts of her psyche and memories and stuff that's coming out of her history, that's manifesting itself as this whole world. It's really interesting. I also, again, I like they totally just lean into the 70s vibe. As with every era, like you could, if you take that out of context, aside from some of the weirder moments where there's questions asked, like I think it's Herb cutting into his own the wall. If you remove those aspects, you can take this episode and you could plonk it back in the 70s and it would totally fit. Like, absolutely.
Well, even that scene outside where they've got, like, the backdrops are so clearly just, like, a painting on the wall sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, like, by our standards, like, by modern standards, it's like, that looks fucking shit. But you need to think, it's
like the
of
era.
the 70s, and that's what they would have done back then, is they would have had these massive, you know, curtains or, you know, massive walls, and they would have hand-painted them to make it look like the background that they were in the show. And again, it's just little things like that that make it feel so authentic of the time frame that they were you know, filming in. So it was very well done.
Yeah, the care and effort and attention to those details.
The attention to detail, exactly. Yeah.
Top notch. As always with Marvel, I think, really.
I agree.
But
the episode 3 is where things get really interesting. And this is what I was fascinated by, because you obviously mentioned this earlier, that the first 2 episodes dropped at the same time, and then we got episode 3 a week later. And I feel like at the end of episode 3 is where we start getting a lot more answers and a deeper look into actually what's happening in this world. And what I found fascinating was that they showed the first 2 episodes to the general public, but they actually gave the first 3 episodes to critics.
They did.
And because I was watching a video, Dan Merle, he did his review, and he was talking about he got the first 3 episodes, and I'm like, wow, this 3rd episode sounds really interesting because like it unlocks so much more. And then once I saw the 3rd episode that week later, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
And I thought it was an interesting choice by Marvel to give critics who were doing early reviews of the show the first 3 episodes, whereas general public had to wait an extra week for that 3rd. Because the first 2 episodes, I can feel like a lot of people would jump on, be like, this is too weird. I don't like it. I don't really know what's going on. I'm checking out. But it's really after the 3rd episode that everyone was like, what's going on here? Yeah. And they really clicked on. So I don't think Disney's ever going to reveal the statistics or the data behind the show. But it would be fascinating to see who continued on, who stopped watching, what episodes dropped off, like the audience retention. I'd be fascinated to know those numbers because again, it's a really weird show, and I don't know how many of just general audiences would have continued to be engaged. But for us diehard fans and those who were engrossed in the story and wanted to know what happened next, I feel like we were rewarded after each episode.
Yeah, I think the comment I heard was people complaining because they got exactly what they were promised. Again, like that third episode, I think having people, reviewers that people trust and all this sort of thing, saying stick with it. The third episode gets better. Was a smart move. Again, like you said, the numbers would be interesting to look at. Again, I think the first two episodes they wanted to set the foundation and really show us that they meant business with this sitcom style. We're just sort of leave the ongoing story sort of on the to the side, and mainly focus on those two. Just leave them as self-contained episodes. Which, if you were expecting that, and if I enjoyed watching those two just because it was a funny sitcom with two great leads and the tiniest hints of something more sinister and interesting going on, that you would really enjoy those. But it's, like I said, it's only after the third episode that we really get this, there's that end. I think even the end of the second episode with that, the beekeeper was the first moment when she glitched it and people were going, oh.
Well, even the little Easter eggs and appearances of the sword logo across each episode was enough for people to be like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
There's obviously something bigger at play that is interfering with the simulation, but what is it and how is it happening? And I feel like at the end of episode 3, where Wanda ejects Monica from the Hex, that's when we figure out like, oh shit, like this is so much more grand than we anticipated.
Yeah.
This isn't just confined to a single house. This is a whole town.
Yeah.
And this was the one thing that I was so skeptical of coming into the show, was when they first announced this thing way back when at whatever Disney investors meeting it was, however many years ago.
Yeah.
And they announced the cast, and they announced that Kat Dennings was coming in as Darcy, Jimmy Woo as Randall Park, and then Kathryn Hahn as this nosy neighbor. I was like, this is a really weird cast for this show about Wanda and Vision, these two super powerful characters.
Yeah, particularly Kat Dennings and Jimmy Woo,
who are two,
Randall Park, who don't have any connection to
Wanda or Vision. And they were
before.
both side comedic characters in the Ant-Man and the Thor franchises. And it was like, how does this make sense? And I was super skeptical of this, because I remember when they announced WandaVision, the show was going to happen at San Diego Comic-Con, I was like, yes, I'm so keen, because those two characters are some of my favorites in the MCU. And then I think it was a year later, they had the Disney meeting and they were like, this is the cast, this is what the show is about. And I was like, And my excitement actually dropped down significantly. I was like, this show doesn't really sound what I was expecting. And then we got that first trailer and I was like, fuck, I'm back on board.
Yeah.
And it just looked so good and so wacky and interesting. And then obviously as the show rolled out episode to episode and this mystery unfolded and the characters started interacting, it all just felt so natural. And bringing Darcy back into the MCU was a really good choice in hindsight, because she was one of the characters I did not like from the Thor movies, but she actually worked really well in this show for some reason.
Yeah, I always think she was sort of misplaced in the Thor movies.
Well, she was very much so a comedic aspect to what was a not very comedic character at that time.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was very much so like she was playing a role to be the funny person, when Thor was not funny, and the characters and the first two Thor movies, yes, there's funny aspects about it, and there's actually some of my favorite funniest jokes in that first Thor movie, but she was very much serving a role. But here in this, she was very much so fulfilling a story role, as opposed to being just a one note character that was just off to the side. Because obviously back then she was a intern for Jane Foster, who was obviously studying astrophysics, and now to bring her back as an astrophysicist herself, I thought was a nice callback, and I really appreciated that moment. But what moment I really appreciated was when Jimmy Woo whipped out his ID as the card trick that he learned from Scott.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That moment,
so good.
I'm not even kidding you. That is dead set one of my favorite moments from the show, just because it's such a subtle Easter egg and reference to that Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. But it's those little character moments that make this universe so rich and enjoyable, because this character is like, that was so unnecessary. but it just makes that character so much more interesting and entertaining, because it's like you could tell that since the 5 years since Ant-Man and the Wasp, he's been learning magic, getting better, and now he's actually
He can do it.
perfected
Yeah.
the magic trick.
It's-
It was such a small, minute detail, but it was one of my favorites from the show.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I love that character. I think Randall Park is
He's so good.
he's such a heartwarming character in in Ant-Man and the Wasp. He was only on there for a little bit, and he was sort of a villainous role, but I do like the sort of relationship that those two had. I think that's hilarious, and Paul Rudd plays well off pretty much anyone.
Oh yeah.
But and that's what I think. That's what I liked, is you bring in these comedic characters, and you give them they got so much more depth in this. Like I actually quite enjoy Kat Dennings, even in the Thor movies. Yes, she's out of place, serving a role that doesn't really belong in in those movies. It's a bit out of place, but I think her as playing that character is very enjoyable to watch. So in this show where she sort of fits better, we got to sort of fulfill that potential that she had as that character. It was very fun to watch. And again, like you said, getting a lot more depth, becoming more part of the story rather than just, sitting off to the side, springing one-liners, which she's very good at. But we got to see more of her, and it's always enjoyable to see a character with that bit more depth than...
Because even trying to give him like his moments where he explains a bit more about himself and gives a bit of backstory to him, and then they play it like a joke. Like that moment where he's like, "Do you want any?" And then he talks about having kids, and then Darcy's like, "No, I meant a chip." And it's just little things like that. It's really clever screenwriting, because it's like you're giving backstory to a character who it doesn't really make sense to give him backstory, but you're doing it through a joke that actually was funny, and it worked really well. But episode 4 obviously starts with Monica coming back from the blip. And this was a moment that I did not anticipate happening, but it made so much sense when it happened. And seeing that chaos from a different perspective of everyone returning, because we had seen that in Far From Home, but it was very much so comedic, like everyone coming back and the band symbols going down and the gym being all chaos. But this was a hospital, and it's just so much more frantic. And the way they played that drama in that first opening sequence, I thought was really good.
Yeah, it's another look, and I think it'd be interesting if we get more of that. Yes, overall, bringing back people is a good thing, and that's a triumph and all this, but it's so much more complicated than that. Like with Monica, her mum's gone. She was, she's missed 5 years.
She passed away 3 years ago, so 2 years after the snap.
Yeah, it's like there'd be, across the globe, and now that the MCU is a galaxy or however big it is, there'd be so many stories like that, and that's such a real element to this fantastical world and this really sci-fi fantasy situation that they've got.
Well, another thing that was really that I found that the Russo brothers didn't address in Endgame, but have since talked about in interviews and stuff since the movie's released. And they were talking about, because people would ask, what about people who are in an aeroplane or were in these like really dire situations, and then they get snapped away and then they come back? How does that all work? And the Russos explained that when Bruce Banner snaps his fingers, not only is he the best choice to be the one that snaps his fingers in that moment because he's got the physical endurance to take the pain and the energy from the nano gauntlet, but he's also got the intelligence. And one of the things that the Russo brothers said was that when he snaps his fingers and asks in his mind to bring everyone back, he says, bring everyone back in a nice and safe manner.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that never gets explained in the movies, but that's just an extra detail that the filmmakers have released after the fact. But it makes sense because, if you were on an airplane and then that airplane's obviously not there, it's like, where do you come back? But obviously, in those situations like we see in the hospital, everyone just comes back, and it's still chaotic because everyone's kind of bumping into each other as they come back. But it's still in a way that makes sense because, everyone's going to be safe when they return, as opposed to being brought back to life and then dying straight away, which would be obviously very tragic.
Yeah, there's a Robot Chicken sketch, I think, that's the same thing. It's like a guy in an airport traffic control tower going, we just got like 100 dots showed up on the radar,
yeah.
and they're all gone. So I think, yeah, again, that's one of those details that doesn't need to be in the film. Right? There's no place that you can just explain that without it being sort of clunky and weird. Yeah, it's great that the filmmakers gave us confirmation of that. That's the sort of leap that you can go,
well, it's not relevant for the
think
movie
about.
because you
Exactly.
get the sense of based off the pacing and the story it's telling, but it's just a fun little
Yeah,
nitbit. Yeah,
always those sort of details are always fun to be able to point to and go, actually, no, here's the thing.
Now, one of the things from the episode 4, We Interrupt This Program, that I found quite funny actually was when they show from inside the simulation's perspective of when Wanda pushes Monica outside the hex and how she goes through 3 walls and then the simulation wall, breaking the 4th wall.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really clever thing that I didn't pick up on it straight away. Someone actually pointed out to me on social media, but it was like 1, 2, 3,
Boom.
and
And
then
we're
throughout
out.
the simulation, and it was a very subtle way of being like, we're breaking the 4th wall sort of thing. I thought that was quite clever.
I didn't pick up on that. That's really clever. I do like that that sequence, and I know that Monica said it. She protected her. You can see as she lands, she's still got that sort of glowing
The
red
red glow around
energy.
her, yeah.
That's now I guess sort of acting as a cushion.
Exactly,
yes, I want
yeah.
you out of my world, but I'm not killing you.
Yeah. Because, like, she's not trying to be, like, she isn't exactly trying to be evil in this moment. It's just something that's a byproduct of, what she's doing and the power that she has. But I just thought that was funny that, inside the reality is like a television show, and then outside of the reality is not, even though it technically is in a very meta way. But yeah, just that funny breaking the 4th wall I thought was quite interesting. But the other thing from episode 4 that was very startling that I did not expect and really actually quite like it was a jump scare, but it kind of actually like got to me was when Vision comes through and he's all grayed out, the dead Vision.
Everyone
the
was
corpse of
reacting
Vision.
to that. That's one of those sort of cursed images. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah, like,
it shouldn't,
I was dead
shouldn't
set,
be
like,
as
taken aback by
terrifying
it.
as it is.
Yeah, because it's one of those moments where obviously she just lacks, she just has a lapse in concentration, and you kind of see behind the mask sort of thing.
Yeah,
and
I think
it was very it was very confronting.
it was open to speculation, seeing that, and as we discovered later, it's a different scenario to what we thought. But it's
Yeah, was she puppeting Vision this whole time from...
which is such a
that would
creepy
have been
image.
so messed up. And honestly, if they did that, that would have been really fucked up.
Yeah.
But again, the answer we get later down the road where she basically spawns him out of that piece of the Mind Stone within her and uses her chaos magic to create that, like, makes sense. So
Yeah.
I thought it was a good explanation, and it was a cool way of obviously giving us 2 Visions to face off in the finale.
But I think if you use knowing that now and you go back to that, that's more of a sign of just how
Grief-stricken she is.
she is. Yeah,
She's so tormented by that visual image inside her head that when she's not paying attention, that's what she really sees.
She's obviously, we know he doesn't actually look like that. But yeah,
That's what she
an
thinks
image,
of,
That's
yeah.
an image that she's got in her head, and it crept out into this. Which it would be. I know when I first watched Infinity War, that was one of those like, oh my god, it's a haunting image of, this character literally sucking the life and the color out of him. That sort of dead grey Vision is a really, really sort of sad, quite, and really sort of demoralizing image.
Yeah, I agree.
So obviously for her, it's
Even
someone she
worse.
knows,
Yeah.
not just a character. So that would be something that creeps through.
As we move into episode 5, this is where we start getting a lot more information about a lot more of the story details. And what I found interesting about this episode, and this was probably the first time where I gave some legitimate criticism to the show, was that scene where we're in Sword headquarters, and then basically Director Hayward is like doing this exposition of who Wanda is and basically explaining who she is and kind of updating everyone. Obviously, as a Marvel fan, I knew all this information. I've seen the movies. I remember this stuff. I didn't need it, but I also understand that a lot of people who aren't as big a fans as we are and don't digest this knowledge constantly, that they need that refresher to be like, who's Wanda again? What does she do? Oh, that's right. She did this. So I understand that, but I just felt, again, looking at the show objectively, I thought that was a little bit clumsy in the way that they handled that scene. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's not the best way to handle it. I think
Because even the dialogue I thought was a bit stilted, where he was like, she doesn't have a funny name or whatever. Like, it's a fun tongue-in-cheek moment, but I don't know, it just felt a bit clumsy to me.
yeah, I think it's not perfect way. I think it made sense in universe.
It did, but like
for a
it just
couple of
felt more for the audience as opposed for the characters.
For a couple of reasons. A, for the characters, this is a debriefing that makes sense. But I think it's also setting up Hayward as the way it's showing the way he sees Wanda.
Well, let's take this moment to actually talk about the Hayward character, because at first I was like, "Ooh, okay, so we got this new director guy. He's in charge. Where's he going to go? What's his motivation?" sort of thing. And we obviously learned that he lied about Wanda stealing the Vision's corpse all along, and that actually he's been using the real Vision to bring him back to life to use as a sentient weapon. And obviously that was against the Vision's will. That he even mentioned himself.
Yeah,
so he was
he
literally
did.
just lying blatantly to everyone and trying to spin the narrative based off the security footage that they had. And again, I feel like this character had a lot of potential to be interesting, but overall, I just did not like this character.
Yeah, I think they didn't quite dive into it as much as they could have. There was a moment particularly with, and I can't remember what episode it was in, between him and Monica, going, "You've been gone for 5 years, you don't know what it's been like." There was some really interesting motivation of, having
He was
someone...
just this typical like military guy, and the moment where they fly the drone into the simulation and then they confront Wanda with it, and then he like takes off Monica's controls, like take the shot.
like, shoot.
That moment just fucking pissed me off because I'm like, you are so dumb. You are so dumb. Like,
She's created a false reality. You really think you're just
not
going to be
even
able to
that.
shoot
Like
her?
the fact that Wanda Maximoff is arguably the most powerful character in the Marvel universe that we know of right now.
this stage,
She
yeah.
fucking beat the fuck out of Thanos, and Thanos at that time was arguably one of the most powerful characters. It's confirmed in the finale that she's more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme at her
She'll get to,
potential. And the fact that she's this powerful and then this fucking normal human, average, like, there's nothing special about you. You're a little
You're in over your head. You think you're just going to press a button.
You're a
Shoot.
military guy, and you think you can beat Wanda with a fucking missile? Are you stupid? Like, maybe if you were clever and tried to assassinate her in a more clever way, maybe. But you're gonna fucking fly a drone and then shoot it at her. Like when she came out of the hex and was like, "Is this yours?" and just dominated him like a badass. I'm like, yes, thank you, because
a
this
good
guy's
scene.
a fucking idiot.
That was a good
And
scene, though.
even at the end, talking about Hayward, where he tries to kill the kids. Like, what the fuck is this guy? This guy tries to have the moral high ground in so many situations, and then literally tries to kill children. Like,
Yeah, they're
who
not
are
real,
you?
but they're kids. You're shooting kids.
We'll get to that. I get a bit later when we get to the finale, but that just his character overall, I started off enjoying because I saw the potential, but then once the series ended and none of that potential was realized, I was just like, you were just a
Strawman.
stereotypical military character that had it out for the protagonist, and as a result, I thought that was a huge detriment to the series. Just that character, I didn't enjoy that character, honestly.
Yeah, I think he served the role of being the sort of just big obstacle to everyone else. Both Wanda, as I want to kill Wanda, and Monica, and Darcy and Jimmy as the sort of the good guys on the outside. It meant we had an obstacle who worked in direct opposition to both those two groups, both Wanda in the Hex and that trio outside the Hex. Yeah, I think that there was a missed trick of really having a look at, well, this is a guy who knows what it's like to live in this world of superheroes. He's seen the worst of it. They sort of hinted a really good motivation there that they didn't quite use, which is sad, but I think...
Anyway, to stir us back into the positivity, I guess. Again, shout out to Jimmy Woo, MVP of the show, arguably. When he brings the coffee to Darcy, because like she mentions a few times, can a girl get
Yeah.
a cup of coffee around here?
It's a running joke.
And then it just doesn't happen. And then Jimmy Woo comes in like the hero he is and brings coffee to Darcy and Monica. I was like, oh, it's so good. Again, such a little character moment that just gives him that extra depth that he's actually that nice guy that actually looks out for his friends.
That's what I was hinting at before with the, in Ant-Man, he was like Ant-Man and the Wasp. He was an FBI agent doing his job, but being quite nice about it. And, but
He was very understanding.
Yeah. But in this, we really get to see he's like a character he's a good guy. He's a good guy. And that's always good to see. I know we talk about complex characters and all the rest, but occasionally it's good to just see a nice person.
Exactly. I agree.
And I think that trio is worked really well together. I've seen a couple of people go and you could do a show around these three, particularly those two, Jimmy and Darcy.
Yeah.
And I would watch that. That would be great.
I'll say episode 5 was really one of the episodes where it was the big WTF episode of the season, because this was obviously when we had the introduction of Evan Peters as Quicksilver,
Yes.
Pietro Maximoff into the MCU. When this moment happened, what were your initial thoughts?
I think I said them to my brother at the time when I was watching. I was like, "Oh damn, they did it!
Yeah.
They did it!" I was very excited, very very happy. He didn't quite understand it in the same way that I did, but yeah, I was totally in for this. I was like, yes, so many possibilities that opened up. So a really, really cool moment. Really.
Yeah, I was in a very conflicted state of mind, because I was very much so of the opinion of I was excited for the multiverse and excited to see the universe expand in ways that we didn't anticipate. But I was very much so like, I don't want to see all the previous Marvel content that's been made, all those X-Men movies, the Fantastic Four. I just want that to be its own separate thing. I really wanted the Marvel Cinematic Universe to be its own specific continuity, and we have a certain rules and we have the characters in here. To bring in all the X-Men stuff and like the Spider-Man stuff, I think it would really confuse the MCU and make it so much more complicated. And the justification I have for this was, you mentioned with your brother, my younger sister as well, who hasn't seen those X-Men movies. When that happened, like, she obviously didn't fully understand, and I explained it to her, and then I showed her a few YouTube clips of his best scenes from those movies.
Which are good scenes.
Yes. Oh, they're great scenes. But again, it just complicates the MCU in a way that I am not in favor of, because a lot of casual people who don't know who he was, the actor, and why they recast him, it just becomes way too complicated. And I would much prefer the MCU to be as simple as possible.
I think like the ideal would be picking your best from each of those. So you pick Quicksilver because he's connected to Wanda. But leaving the MCU as a singular continuity in the multiverse. But I think now they've got to a stage where they can sort of touch on it. I think, Doctor Strange might have a look at it.
I think he'll definitely explore it more
without dragging it all in and making it too complicated. You can sort of go halfway, sort of be like, oh, look, here's the multiverse. It exists. We can look at little bits of it, but we're not going to drag it in fully, because you risk alienating a huge audience if you do that.
Regardless, when that happened, it was a huge moment for the MCU, and it really shifted so many people's perspective on what was possible for the story moving forward. Because obviously when Disney bought Fox, everyone was like, when are they bringing mutants in? When's this going to happen? And that was a really defining moment. Obviously, we'll talk about it more when we get to the finale part of the review, but it was interesting to see what they did with that character in the end. Obviously, the next episode was the Halloween episode, and I loved this episode because obviously it was set in the 90s. The what's the word?
Yes.
The similarities to Malcolm in the Middle.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to get at. I thought that was also really good because Wanda and Vision in this sort of 90s perspective with their two kids who are then doing like the breaking the fourth wall sort of thing. I thought that was also really fun because That was a show that was obviously huge back then. I don't know if you've seen Malcolm in the Middle.
I've seen bits.
I've seen bits as well, so I knew that they were referencing that when when it was happening. But it was one of those things that's like, even when they did the intro thing, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But the main thing that stood out to me in this episode was seeing those classic comic book character costumes in the show, in the MCU, fully realized in the full ridiculous glory that we've always wanted to see.
Yeah. Particularly old school Scarlet Witch and Vision. Very weird costumes. And they didn't quite go... I know Vision was like, this was the only thing in my wardrobe. Again, Wanda's going, you're going to wear this because I want you to wear this because it's a Vision costume. Even the kids, I know that, is it Billy was wearing his comic costume.
Yeah.
Which was very interesting.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and we do see more of him in the later episodes, but I do like...
even seeing Quicksilver come in with his classic suit was also really cool.
And the hair.
Yeah. It kind of looked kind of similar to Wolverine's.
It does.
But yeah, it was really cool to see those comic book suits in the MCU because they do look so ridiculous in the comics, but to see them in the MCU. And again, it was really clever because the way they justified that was it was Halloween, so dressing up makes sense.
Yeah,
and two, Wanda gave two very quick explanations as to why they're dressed that way. She said that she's a Sokovian fortune teller. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And he was dressing up as a Mexican wrestler.
Yeah.
Again, so simple, but it justifies those silly comic book suits from the comics and brings it into live action in a way that makes sense and is actually, it's worthwhile bringing those sort of silly costumes into the MCU in a way that if that's what they looked like by default, it would be like, this looks ridiculous. But obviously costuming is a huge thing within the MCU, and seeing Wanda's outfit that we see later, we'll get to that very soon, because that suit was fucking dope.
Yeah, I also like the evil uncle, not evil uncle, the sort of irresponsible uncle that Pietro played was a very fun character.
Well, this episode really kind of explored his character because we knew it was a different actor, but the show was presenting him in a way where he had the memories of the Quicksilver from Age of Ultron. So that was one of the interesting things of trying to, traverse where this character was going and what his understanding of the situation was and where did he come from. That was one of the most intriguing things, was trying to figure out what is this character.
Yeah, I think there's a few moments that show that he's perhaps a little bit of both. I know early in that first scene when they're in the house, he talks about a memory of getting fish or something for Halloween when they were little, and Wanda goes, I don't remember that. He goes, you probably repressed the memory, but it's sort of this isn't quite the same guy.
Yeah.
There's some gaps here that totally work as a line in the show, but sort of hint at something's weird here.
Well, yeah, exactly. But the one thing that tipped me off straight away, and again, at the time, this was giving me more evidence for Mephisto, was when Pietro says to the two children, unleash hell, demon spawn.
Yep.
As soon as he said that, I'm like, Mephisto.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's evil. There's something going on here. Obviously, we find out later that's not the case because it was Agatha all along. And
dope song.
Yes, it was a freaking hilarious song. I'd be lying if I said I didn't listen to that song a couple of times on Spotify.
Yeah.
But what I think was really funny about this episode, and it kind of plays into that moral dilemma of, fictional people within a simulation. What's the moral standpoint you take? Because as you see that in the center of the city, or sorry, I should say the center of the town, where Wanda is, because she's obviously the main character of the simulation. She's obviously that's where all the action's happening. But towards the outskirts of the town,
see those glitches.
You see the glitches, the people standing still, but you can see inside their minds, they're obviously still feeling it. And when Vision was exploring the outskirts of the town, This was a moment where it was like, holy shit, this is fucked up that this is happening.
That woman hanging up the thing, you can see her crying. It's you see it in her eyes. It's like that is a haunting image.
It is definitely a haunting image because again it plays into that idea of like inside like a video game, because like my brother, when we were watching this episode, he made the comparison to like they're like NPCs in like a video game. You know, they're like in GTA, right? You know, they're just the people that are on the street that you would just drive past or whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, but are these people really real? Like, you know, in GTA, obviously it's a coded simulation, but for them in the world, do they feel real? And it comes back to that sort of moral dilemma of like, inside a simulation, how do we treat the inhabitants of the simulation? It's like, it was one of those things that's like really like, wow, like this goes quite deep on like a philosophical level.
And layering that personality onto in what is in universe real people. I think it's like Free Guy, which is a movie coming out some stage. No one knows when movies coming out. But yeah, it's an interesting look. And I sort of suppose a look at how she's doing it.
Well, because it's like a video game, because obviously as you move throughout the world, it obviously has to code in and spawn.
Yeah.
Like in Minecraft, you know, as you go across, you can see the map spawning in. So it's kind of similar in that perspective, because you've got the rest of the characters on the outskirts kind of just being on idle, waiting, and that's why they're glitching out, because she doesn't have the power to control everything, even though she kind of does.
I think she has the power, but not the concentration.
Exactly, yeah.
So, but that's the danger. I think that's, you know, and you know that Vision's doing that from the start. He goes, I'm on neighborhood watch. And she's like, you didn't tell me this. So you can see she's sort of annoyed, possibly because of the risk of knowing that the false reality is centered around her. And if he's too far away from her, he'll start seeing the gaps, which is a very, very interesting sort of moment. And the reveal of there being kids in Westview, as of their fight at the end of the previous episode. Which is an excellent argument.
All these children just come out of nowhere.
Yeah, where are the kids?
And it really makes you think what happened to them previously. Yeah, because like I think in the finale, one of the characters says like, "Let my kid out of my room" or whatnot. It's like, this is fucked up what she's doing. But one of the things that Vision did at the end of, or towards the end of that episode, was when he confronted Agnes at the time. Agnes, who was sitting in her car towards the outskirts. This was a moment where Vision was like trying to figure out what was going on, and at that stage I feel like that was the show's attempt to release Agnes from suspicion and make her not the prime suspect. Yeah, because everyone at that time was like, she's obviously, something's going on here.
She's shown a couple of, there's the scene where she's,
but then when you see Vision touch her head and she kind of breaks out of the reality, and she's like, you know, talking to Vision like we've seen, you know, Norm and other characters that we've seen interact. It was interesting because like that moment was like, okay, she's not bad. Not her. But then you see later it was all just a ruse, and she was playing Vision the whole time.
Which is something that I sort of annoyed me, if I'm honest, because it's one of the things I always find annoying when you have moments like that where not red herrings, but just straight up lying.
Oh, yeah.
Where, like, all the evidence in that scene indicates that she wasn't, even though she was. And it's always something that I always think about is when you're doing something like that, I think it's always right to have it, if the audience is paying attention, they can figure it. Like, all the clues should be there. The fact that they've just done a complete U-turn on that sort of annoyed me a little bit.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I would have liked maybe if when Vision touched her head, it wasn't yellow, it was purple or something. Just something different to indicate that it's not exactly what it looks like. Just enough that the audience knows something without having been completely lied to.
Well, that's why I'm convinced that it was the filmmaker's attempt to try and release that suspicion from her, to make it look as authentic as possible. Because even in the moment, I was like, oh, okay, maybe she's not bad. Maybe she is part of the town. In that moment, of course. But then when we move into episode 7, that's when everything is obviously changes. But the last thing I want to mention from episode 6 was when obviously Wanda, in hopes of saving Vision, who's exited the Hex, that was a very heartbreaking moment, seeing him die yet again.
And going, not even worried about himself.
Worried about
there
the
are
people.
people in here.
And that's,
help
again,
them.
such a
oh.
great moment for him, because obviously deep down, he doesn't really know who he is, but deep down, he's a hero.
Still got that.
I love that moment.
He's still got that sort of moral compass, no matter where. And we've seen that before, when in Age of Ultron, before he was Vision, when it was Jarvis, and he's been attacked by Ultron, but he's still fighting Ultron, even when he's this scattered computer program that almost doesn't exist anymore. They said he didn't even know he was doing it. It's just his natural, totally ingrained into, even as Jarvis, ingrained into that character.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's such good writing.
Yeah, and it's a really strong character. Another moment I liked was Quicksilver asking Wanda how you did it. It was the hint that he's not with Wanda's not in control of him, because he's going, how'd you do it? And she's sitting there going, I don't know.
Yeah, it was definitely him trying to get a glimpse into her. And
could
it
sense
makes
that
sense that obviously it was Agatha trying to understand
probe.
how she did. And yeah, exactly.
Which really, that was another thing that opened it up to, there was a lot of speculation of who is in control of this guy. Is it Hayward? Is it, I think, Mephisto or Agnes or Doctor Strange, I think was mentioned. We didn't know, but you could sense that someone was like, how did you do it?
Puppeteering him in a way.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's that moment where Wanda loses that concentration again, and you see his corpse again.
Yeah.
And again, it's similar to that moment with Vision, and the speculation was back then is Wanda puppeting this dead Vision? So it was like a similar thing with Pietro. Was she puppeting a dead corpse again? These were the questions we had at the time, and it was like really deep stuff for a Marvel show.
Yeah, and sort of verging on very, very uncomfortable and very not PG, sort of almost horror. They sort of towed the line to a horror sort of show there.
Well, it gives me hope for the Doctor Strange sequel, because that is supposedly the first horror movie in the MCU.
It's got Sam Raimi,
Yes.
who's a horror director as well as Spider-Man.
I'm excited for that, to see how it all ties in.
Be interesting.
But the one thing from the end of episode 6 I thought was so hilarious, and it was a real glimpse into what Wanda thought of S.W.O.R.D. on the outside, was when the Hex expands and all of the S.W.O.R.D. base gets turned into a circus.
Yeah.
And you see all these clowns. It's just, that's such a great, funny way of being like, you fucking idiots. You have no idea what you're doing. You're just so... What you're doing is ridiculous. Yeah. I just thought that was a really funny tongue-in-cheek way of, seeing how in universe that's what she thinks of S.W.O.R.D. because of what they're doing.
Another thing that they hinted at was Monica's engineering friend, who got hinted at a couple of times.
Well, the big rumor with that was that it was Reed Richards. And
which
that
would
obviously
be a massive thing.
Well, yes, but it wasn't addressed at all. So it's one of those things that I feel like that's just a symptom of fan over speculation. I'm not going to read too much into it, because we know the Fantastic Four is coming, but not anytime soon. So I'm not going to get my hopes up for that sort of speculation at this stage, because I don't think that was on the cards.
No,
really,
it's too
ever.
early. It's way too
Because
early.
there's no way you're going to bring Reed Richards into a WandaVision show. You're going to save him for the Fantastic Four.
He's too big a character.
If there was casting for that, I think we would have heard about it. Anyway, moving on to episode 7, Breaking the Fourth Wall. This was when we moved into the 2000s, and the shows that they were paying reference to were Modern Family and The Office.
Yep.
And these are two shows that I have obviously grown up with and had watched. And when you mentioned at the beginning of this discussion about, obviously we were a bit too young to understand the other stuff, this was the episode for me, because this was the episode where I understood exactly what they were doing, because I actually grew up watching Modern Family as it was coming out.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Modern Family.
I've seen so much of Modern Family. I stopped watching a couple years ago when the show got really not interesting anymore. but I've seen so many seasons of it to know that when the tropes that they were using, those, the interviews with the characters and the zoom ins and the zoom outs, and that moment where Vision looks to the camera and does like the whole, John Krasinski like looking to the camera sort of thing.
Does a gym.
From The Office. It was so good. And just the moments with, again, giving praise to Elizabeth Olsen, was that her performance in this episode was so similar to the mother character from Modern Family. Just her mannerisms, the way she conducted herself, the way she spoke. It was so similar. It was almost eerie to me. It was like, holy shit, this is so good.
Yeah.
It was just amazing. And it, again, it's a testament to her as an actress, because I assume it would have been the same with all the other decades. I just didn't understand it as well. But for obviously the older people who are watching this show, I'm sure they would have got a good kick out of each era. But for me personally, who understood this era, especially because obviously I was born in 99, grew up in the 2000s sort of thing, that was one of those things that's like, I really understood this and I really appreciated it. And the little Office remix theme at the, as the intro was playing, I thought was really good as well.
Yeah, it was a good episode. I like the team up of Darcy and Vision. I think that's a good combo, especially as the sort of Darcy expositing to Vision about his past, because he has no memories. One thing I did see a lot, and it came up in a couple of the earlier episodes when they're talking about Wanda being the only one who could challenge Thanos, and then there's a moment with Captain Marvel gets mentioned, and Monica doesn't look too pleased.
Yeah, definitely very subtle setup for Captain Marvel too.
But the big thing was, how does everyone know about this? Like, how the hell does...
Actually, that's a good point that
Darcy,
you mentioned that.
How does Darcy know exactly that, Vision died and then got brought back and then died again?
Well, see, that moment I think you can explain. I think that would have been a moment where the living Avengers who actually witnessed that could have reported that in like a debrief, and then that becomes common knowledge. But my question is how do people like Jimmy Woo and stuff know that Captain Marvel and then Wanda both went toe-to-toe with Thanos? Like, did they watch the Avengers Endgame movie? Like, how do they know that? Like, we knew who was within that space. And it's not like there were security cameras or whatnot around there. And I can't imagine those two characters boasting about that. So I was very confused by how they knew this information, because I couldn't see any logical reason to them to know it. I agree. That was a very strange moment. Like, it made sense, but it didn't make sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it made sense why it needed to be there, why it was there. And it's the sort of thing that you could probably gloss over and go, it was
very meta
thing.
In a way, yeah.
Also, I reckon, there'd be a similar sort of debrief at the end of Endgame when everyone comes back and the world governments are like, what the hell happened, guys?
I guess, yeah, but it's still one of those things that's like, it was very specific to those moments. I was like, did you watch this movie sort of thing?
Yeah.
It kind of, again, that was one of the writing things I was like, I feel like that could have been better with the way they kind of made it more feel better in universe. But, it is what it is. So, but this episode obviously shows Wanda, and you can clearly tell across this season, she's slowly losing control and really becoming more and more unhinged. And her emotional state in this episode was really quite depressing.
Yeah, even she's aware, and she's sort of talking about the feeling of, obviously at the end of the previous episode, she's expanded the hex and is feeling the effects of, obviously that's a lot of power, yeah. And the cracks are showing, and all the way through I was sort of wondering, is that because she's losing, her mental state is deteriorating, or because she's becoming more aware of it? Because she's mentioned multiple times I guess had
did
no
it by
memory.
accident.
Yeah, she wasn't fully intentionally doing it.
That's a good
and
point. I haven't thought of that, yeah.
And particularly as Vision is becoming more aware and going, this is wrong, you've got to stop. And she's sort of, it's all focusing for her, and she's realizing what she's doing and sort of, I guess, doubting herself.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of
yeah, that's a good point.
It glitching back and forth between different eras, and it's a bit odd.
No, I actually agree with your reasoning more, because my initial interpretation was that because it's become so big, she's just not able to control it as good. But I think that added aspect of being self-aware and noticing the actual simulation was a part of being like, oh shit, it's all kind of combining, and now all the various decades are bleeding into each other. I think that's an accurate assessment.
So when she started, it's sort of a reflex thing, and now that it's one of those things that once you think about, once
'Cause
you
when you-
realize you're doing it, you stop doing it, and it becomes harder.
Textbook overthinker sort of thing.
Yeah. And now that she's aware of it, it's harder to control. Whereas before she was doing it on an instinctive, emotional, reactive sort of way, which I think it was, and it certainly made it push the story forward. Going, this is it was a big jump. We'd seen glitches before, stuff that came in. That sort of thing, but this was like the first time it's like, now it's really falling apart now.
Exactly,
She's nearing the end of this. She can't hold it on that much longer.
And besides the big reveal of this episode, the other main standout, to me at least, was when Monica gained superpowers.
Ooh.
And I obviously assume you knew this, but obviously Monica in the comics has superpowers, and she is
does.
a superhero of sorts. She's been known by many names in the comics.
Yeah, she's got so many names. You look
But
down the list.
obviously, when she was announced for this show way back when at the Disney investors meeting or whatever it was, Disney announcement, that was a big thing. I was like, oh, okay, they're aging her up from the first Captain Marvel in the 90s. Okay, we know where this is leading.
Yeah.
And obviously, with the post-credit scene at the end of the finale, we know she's going to be in the sequel, and she's going to be, interacting with Skrulls and Nick Fury and Captain Marvel again. So it'll be cool to see her now that she has superpowers, how Carol reacts to that, and how their relationship is similar or different. Because, like you mentioned earlier, when the thought of Captain Marvel entered her mind when it was mentioned earlier, she did not seem pleased. Again, there's a story there, and I don't know if it's because they had a falling out or if it's just because Carol hasn't been to Earth in such a long time that she feels resentful.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something that will get explored in the sequel that will be coming out in too many years away.
Yeah.
So the other big thing, obviously, was Agatha all along, and this song was way too catchy that it needed to be.
Yeah, it was a good song. Yeah.
It was a good song, but this was the moment where we were like, okay, now we're into overdrive. We're obviously caught up with all the various decades that we can go through with the sitcoms because, sitcoms have basically died out in the year that we are, 2021 now. The last really big one was The Big Bang Theory, and that's done now. So sitcoms have obviously finished out. Where they how they structured the show, I think, was really clever. That's actually another thing I want to address now, is that the whole show, it goes over the 9 episodes, but each episode obviously goes through a decade, and the way they structured the episode and the way they told the story over the 7 episodes of the various decades, I think was actually really, really clever. It was a great way of pacing the show. It was a great way of giving people nostalgia. And it was a great way of feeding enough mystery and story beats over the season to really keep it entertaining. And I have to give props to the screenwriters in that perspective of making each decade make sense, and then also structuring it in a way that felt consistent over the season. And it wasn't a case of the first half of the season was really good, and then there was a boring part in the middle, and then the ending was great. It felt consistently good all the way through.
Yeah, because I think having that sort of structure is always really good to prevent those sort of dips and rises, particularly with pacing, because each episode has
a distinct feel
and its own structure that they can draw from the sitcom structure and give each episode its own little plot, basically.
Exactly, yeah. Like the first 2, it was the Mrs. and Mr. Hart story. Yep. Second episode was a magic show, and then it just evolved from there.
Yeah, and it was all these sort of mini plots that are sort of driving towards. It was all, the first plot was we're trying to hide. The second one is hiding our magic. And then, the Halloween and all this. Each story has its own beginning, middle, and end in a sort of sitcom hijinks problem we've got to get through today, whilst also driving forward towards this big climax, which, like I said, works really well for pacing and story structure to sort of guide them through a 9-episode thing, which is much longer in terms of time, I think, if you add it all up across a series than movies and stuff that they've done before.
Oh, 100%, yeah. It's one of those things where, because of the way they structured it, it really led to, like, we went throughout these various decades of the sitcoms, and it really built into the MCU finale that we were expecting. And obviously the penultimate episode called Previously On. This was a bombshell of an episode because it really opened up the backstory to not only Wanda, but also a little bit of Vision and the Maximoff family. There were so many great story beats in there that really expanded our knowledge and understanding of these characters in a way that made the universe so much more rich and made us really fall in love with these characters so much more. Do you agree?
I think, yeah, absolutely perfect place to have that sort of episode as well. We've built up, we've got all the pieces set as of like the end of the previous episode where it's Agatha now is our villain. We've revealed all that. Now let's take a moment, sort of the pause before you
go down the roller coaster. Yeah. That's a good analogy.
And really, it was such an emotional episode.
Oh, so much. I cried several times.
Yeah, particularly the scene between Wanda and Vision.
In the Avengers compound?
Yeah.
So emotional.
So good. So good. The writing is amazing.
The dialogue is so good.
Both those characters.
It felt so sincere. And that's what I love about the MCU and why I'm so connected to it. Because these characters not only cross over between movies and now shows, but the characters feel so consistent, and because they've evolved so much from when we first saw them, you know, the best example being Iron Man, where he was in the first Iron Man to where he ended up being in Endgame, this selfish narcissist to, you know, planet-saving, you know, selfless hero. You know, and Wanda and Vision are in a similar boat where, you know, Wanda is a very conflicted character. And she has had so much grief in her past that she's never got over, you know, with her parents dying to the Stark bomb, losing her brother in Age of Ultron, and then losing the love of her life, you know, Vision, you know, in Infinity War. She's gone through so much turmoil, and to see her kind of go through all of this and revisit it in a way that obviously she knew about, but we and Agatha, so again, it makes sense for the story, we are learning about this for the first time. And again, it was a really clever way of making it make sense in universe, whilst also making a flashback episode, because that's what this is, make sense for us as well.
Yeah, it's such a... I love the character of Wanda. I have enjoyed her character for a while. She's great, and I love magic. It's one of my things. And knowing, you know, that sort of crossover between she was a villain, she may potentially be sort of villainous in the future, as we've seen with things like House of M and stuff in the comics. She's a very important character, but this episode giving her that emotional backstory. She's such a tragic character, and your heart goes out to her because, you know, as she describes, it's like every time she gets moving forward again, the wave hits her, something else. It's always, you know,
one step forward, two steps back. Yeah,
you know, she's gone, and I think that they leaned into that's why she's finally snapped, because she had nothing else. So her parents died, she still had her brother.
Her brother died.
Her brother
Vision.
She had Vision. Vision died, and she's got nothing left.
Yeah. It is truly tragic.
It's so sad. And they play it so well. But there's even that hopeful bit. Like Vision, he's an interesting character to do it with, as an android. Sort of the objective, you know, unemotional at that stage look at emotions in general. Like she's a very emotional character.
He's a very analytical character.
He's an analytical character, but they make it work, and it's a great pairing.
It's great chemistry.
Their chemistry and everything, it's such a lovely pairing. But his look, the line is, what is grief but love persevering? It's
so good.
So lovely.
It really puts a climax to their story, because it really showcases where they were and where they are now, and it really kind of crescendos that story in a really satisfying way, because you understand how they got to that stage and how their relationship evolved, because obviously they were introduced in Age of Ultron, and then we saw them in Civil War, and then Infinity War, and we got little bits and pieces of them, but they were never the main focus of those stories.
Yeah.
And because you can only do so much in a 2.5 hour story, you know, you only have enough real estate to give to all the characters. And I thought the stuff that they did in the movies was obviously perfect with the way they handled it. But now seeing it seeing it expressed in a 9-episode story, I think was even better. And at that moment with Vision and Wanda in the Avengers compound, I thought was really profound, because you could clearly tell that Vision is trying to comfort her and he doesn't know how, because he still is trying to understand
He
humanity.
doesn't understand emotions yet.
And yet he still has these underlying feelings of love for her. So
Yeah.
it was very cute in that way as well.
Oh, it's a like I say, it's an adorable couple. They're great together, and I love that that's part of his journey as well. We've seen through his stories, he starts out as a robot who's good at heart, as we said before, fighting Ultron. He lifts the hammer, but not quite understanding that becoming human. And he talks to Ultron at the end as sort of humans as an outside. He's got an outside perspective.
That scene at the end of Age of Ultron between Vision and Ultron
Yep.
is one of my favorite scenes in the MCU.
Yeah,
it's
there's
just so
grace,
profound.
There's grace in their failings. And then in Civil War, he's becoming more human. He's falling for Wanda. They're developing a relationship. Then he makes a mistake. Very human thing to do.
Yes.
And then, so it's that she's so emotional and he's her rock, but he's also becoming more human, which it's a lovely story, those two together. And I think one of the weaknesses of the movie so far is, yes, he's got that story, but largely, particularly in Infinity War, was he was almost a character who was serving her character. Whereas now we've got to see a whole series with him as a dual lead with her. It's a very, very interesting way to see him develop more as a character, almost independent. Like, those two will always be linked. That's why the name is one word, WandaVision.
Yes.
But yeah, and
because the Mind Stone is also so central to that, because obviously her powers were awoken because of the Mind Stone, and he was created because of the Mind Stone.
Yeah.
So not only are they so linked in that way, but it also gives more justification as to why they're in love, because they are so connected both spiritually and, in a way, kind of physically.
Yeah. Again, I think that comes up. It's mentioned. There's that scene in Civil War where she's doing her hand, going, "I don't know what this is," and he's like, "I don't know what this is either." Yeah. Again, like you said, just
Or even the moment in Infinity War where she, says, "All I feel is you," and then at the end of the movie where she says, when Vision says, "All I feel is you," and that was such a great emotional moment for that movie. But then bringing it back into the show where
I don't feel you. I can't feel you.
That destroyed me, dude.
Oh.
I was fucking tears
So
were in my
sad.
eyes, man. It was so sad. And again, it all led to this one moment where Wanda is so grief-stricken that it all climaxes in her creating the Hex. And this sort of pinnacle that everyone was expecting, but we're waiting to see how it originated, and to see it in such an emotional way really kind of justified why she was doing the things that she was doing. However terrible they were, it makes sense. And
Yeah.
I think that's the praise of a good story is when, the villain is always the hero of their own story.
Yeah.
And what she thinks she was doing was good, but she failed to understand the repercussions and the trauma that she was inflicting on the people of the town.
Yeah, and it's in a position where, even though we've seen she did some terrible things, obviously all these people hated it, it's hard to be mad at her because it's so tragic. Because we've seen this backstory. Again, it's just sympathy. Just like, I just want to give her a hug.
Yeah, dude, honestly, I have that same vibe.
I felt it was very reminiscent of her creating the Hex, very reminiscent of the moment when Quicksilver dies in Age of Ultron, when she does the fall to her
She
knees.
falls to her knees, yep. I had that same thought.
Yeah, it's, again, reinforcing that she's just been through this again and again and again. But it was good to see the start of their relationship.
Well, I have to ask you actually, because when those two characters were first introduced in Age of Ultron, were you aware that they got together and stuff?
I was.
So
yep.
were you one of the people that was on board originally of those characters getting together? Were you so excited for that?
Yeah.
Because I was on board from day dot. As soon as I found out that those characters got together in the comics, I was like, let's see it on screen. I want to do it. And I think the small steps that they took in Civil War and then how it climaxed in Infinity War, I was so grateful. And because of the small steps that we got, with those characters and how their relationship evolved, they've become some of my favorite characters. I love Vision because he's so analytical, and the way he looks at situations and he's so competent. And that's one of my favorite aspects of a character is competency. And Wanda is so compelling because she is so, she has such a sympathetic backstory, and everything she's gone through is so emotional. And because of the challenges that she's faced, it really makes you understand her in a way that is compelling. And that's why their relationship is so fantastic, I feel like, because you understand them so well. And I was excited to see them from day dot, and I'm glad that we're at this stage now in WandaVision, a TV show, where we get to see this awesome story play out.
Yeah, and I thought that the relationship was very natural. Like you saw...
I agree.
Yeah, I think the only moment in Age of Ultron, like they don't interact much other than he swoops in and saves her.
Very subtle.
Yeah, and it's all they needed. And then it was over those movies, again, just relying on the chemistry of the two actors and their natural connections that just naturally come up. They're both talking about the Mind Stone. They're both sort of these misunderstood, very powerful characters who don't fully understand their own power. And their different emotional states, let's say, just made it was a very natural thing. It didn't feel like they were writing it as a relationship. It was just two characters in a room getting closer in a very natural way. It's I think probably the best romantic storyline Marvel's ever done.
I 100% agree. This all leads to the finale of WandaVision. This was a very conflicting finale for me. I'll say I am interested to see what you think of the episode. What were your thoughts on the finale? Because I feel like they stuck the landing for the most part, but there was a few things that I had issues with, and I'm interested to see if we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts on the finale overall?
I think when I watched it, I was very happy. Totally happy. I can see there's a lot of talk online about different things that I'm sure we'll go into in a sec. Interested to see which of the parts that you're less happy with that I can sort of understand. But looking at, if you divide it into two things that they could have done, they picked the one that I went, that's way more important, and nailed it. Really, really nailed it so well.
Okay.
So what were your thoughts?
Well, I don't know, because the episode, there's a few things that I'm quite conflicted on. So I guess I should say I did enjoy the finale for what it was, but I have to address this straight up, is that Quicksilver. The reveal of Ralph Boner, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
just what? Just what the actual fuck?
Yeah,
Like,
it's
what are your thoughts on that?
it is a little bit of a letdown. I feel like there's one of two ways that we can go with this. Either it's not finished, that's not the whole story, which I'm hoping they're leaning towards, because otherwise the alternative is, hey, we cast Evan Peters as this character that he's played a version of somewhere else, not related at all. That just feels kind of mean. Because they knew that people were going to go down a rabbit hole as soon as he showed up.
100%. And that's why I'm so disappointed in it.
Giving it nothing would be quite cruel.
Yeah, it just felt like an epic troll. It's like,
Absolutely.
Here's this meta in joke for the fans, but let's not address it at all story-wise, because they would have had to have known like you said, rabbit hole that people would have gone down with theorizing and being trying to like, oh my God, now they're connected sort of thing. They would have known that, and they still went with that. And they, because this is the annoying thing about it, is that they built this story element up, and they built so much importance and mystery around it, and it all led to just a dick joke.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh no.
Like, it's just, it felt so, it was quite literally like blue balls, right? Like, it's a boner joke. It's almost like they're self-aware that they were trolling us.
Yeah.
It's like they called him Ralph Boner, and it was such a blue balls moment. I don't know. It was one of those things I was so disappointed in, and I didn't enjoy at all, because But see, I didn't enjoy it when they revealed it. But see, this is why I'm conflicted, because like I mentioned earlier about the MCU being one specific singular continuity that makes sense and isn't confusing, they kept that.
Yeah.
So they didn't address the outer repercussions of it, and he is just this nameless guy that isn't important. But it was that same actor from those movies. So it's a fun little meta joke, and we still keep this smooth timeline and continuity that makes sense. So from that perspective, I'm glad that they're not confusing things with the X-Men universe, which has a lot of movies that I'm not a really big fan of. In saying that, though, I feel like the moment itself definitely set us up for disappointment.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing, not a bad direction that they've taken it in, but doing it in such a tease way is just really mean.
Yeah, I agree.
Other than that, I think, well, we know one of the things that was speculated about quite a lot was Agnes's husband, Ralph.
Well, again, that was more evidence to why I thought Mephisto was involved, because she mentioned him so many times, and it's like,
Who's Ralph?
Ralph's going to show up.
Where's
Ralph's
Ralph?
going to show up. Is it going to be Mephisto? And then it just led to nothing. It was so underwhelming.
Yeah, the other thing is we never actually find out who the missing person was, which is part of why I think we may not be done with all the elements. I think a lot of the elements in
I
this
feel like
story
that's
aren't
grasping at
quite
straws
done.
in a sense, though. It's like we still want to hang on to the possibility, but it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I don't, and again, looking at the episode as a whole, the parts that they nailed far outweigh these sort of tease references that never went anywhere. Mm-hmm. That's a bummer, but if you look at the rest of the episode, I think focusing purely on this, it was one of those, how much do we set up for the future versus how much are we finishing the story that we're telling here? And obviously, telling the story is always priority number one.
Of course, 100%. You're dead set on the money with that. There was a few issues I had with the finale. So one of the other things I was quite disappointed in was the way that we kind of left a lot of our characters. Like Darcy kind of gets one moment and then that's it.
That
We
was a
don't
bit
really
weird
get
for me.
closure with her. Randall Park as Jimmy Woo kind of got like a send-off in the post-credit scene. Obviously, Monica is set up for Captain Marvel 2
Or Secret Invasion.
or Secret Invasion, depending on how they do that.
Yeah.
But
That's
it's one of those things where I kind of wanted the finale. I understand that Wanda and Vision are the two central aspects of it. It just felt a bit clumsy in the way that they kind of left us off with the characters. We've obviously already talked about Hayward and my disdain for that character. But the other thing that I felt was problematic about the finale was the way they handled Monica in the finale, because she didn't really have any purpose to be in and around the area. She kind of just popped up whenever she was convenient. Did you feel that? Like, kind of, because she pops up when she saves the kids, which was a cool moment. But then she obviously pops up at the end when Wanda is walking away from the town. She just like kind of appears out of nowhere just
Yeah,
when she's
she didn't-
needed.
yeah,
And it just felt really like it kind of took me out of it, because it was like, why? Like, it just felt really forced when she interacted with people, because it didn't feel natural. And there was a lot of times where she's kind of just standing in the background,
Yeah.
just walking around. Like, there's even a shot where she's literally just like pacing in the background. It's like, you don't need to be here. And that was one of the things that I felt like from a directorial standpoint, I was like, the way they handled Monica in the finale, I was like, that could have been so much better, because she could have played a role better, but she didn't really need to be there. And having her there, I felt like it was just weird.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed the moments she had, but I think, yeah, you're right, that they had this set of moments that they wanted her for. So saving the kids, that was cool because her powers look dope. The
Yes.
full glowing energy, she looks
It did
almost
look cool.
liquidy. That's pretty awesome. That moment at the end when she's talking to Wanda, I thought that was quite good.
Again, the scenes were good, but
That
it
emotional
felt
connection.
the way they came together was forced.
Yeah, so I think they had like this set of moments that they wanted her, and they were well written and well executed, but they didn't really have anything to do with her in the gaps. They didn't really have a way to sort of have her maneuver to be in these positions in a really good way. So they just sort of left her there and had all these moments sort of come to her. So, the kids are getting shot right near her, so she jumps in. Wanda walks past her as she leaves. But otherwise, they were like, we don't want to take her out because we still have these moments that we want with her, but we don't have anything to do with her in the meantime. So yeah, it was a bit disjointed.
I agree. It just those were really the only issues I had with the finale. The finale, I felt like for the most part, like stuck the landing. It was just the Ralph Boner thing I was severely, underwhelmed with. The way they handled Monica and obviously the Hayward stuff. I was like, why is this happening? But other than that, I really enjoyed so much in the finale. I think White Vision, who's obviously from the comics, versus the simulation Vision. I thought that was a really cool fight, and the way that ended was really dope.
That was so Vision as well. The ship of Theseus.
I request elaboration.
Yeah,
so good,
so funny. I like the way it sort of was a fight, and then it felt so Vision to just go, hang on a sec.
They're having a logic battle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so good.
And obviously I'm a bit of a philosophy nerd, so the ship of Theseus is a classic philosophical problem. I'm not sure where White Vision went. Now, part of me wants to think that he flew up and destroyed himself, because what what he said was, it's my programming directive is to destroy the Vision, and that conversation was then the two of them going, but we're both Vision.
Yes.
So he's gone, maybe I need to destroy myself, because part of me wants that.
If they did that, they would have showed it. I feel like
it's a long shot that's what happened. I'm not confident that that's what happened, but I
feel like he kind of just flew away. Like, it doesn't really explain. That was one of the loose threads that they didn't explain, and this will be why I'm curious to see where they go with it, because if it is the Vision that we know from the MCU, just in a new body, so to speak, then why did he not try to go and help Wanda? Like, there's obviously something that they're setting up for future that will make sense eventually, but to right now, it's like, where did he go? What's going on with Vision, and what's going to happen next? So the questions that will be answered somewhere.
Which, and I think this is one of my major things with what they've done in recent years. Probably one of the only thing that's really annoyed me is the lack of character deaths. I've talked about in Infinity War, we had the 3 major deaths pre-snap, which were Loki, Gamora, and Vision. Now, in my head, those were the 3 deaths that had to stick.
Yes, I am on the same page.
Loki's sort of coming back. I know it's different Loki, but in spirit, it feels like they were
Tom Hiddleston's coming back. We're getting more Loki. So yeah, I'm on the same page.
Which was sort of felt like they were going, no, people like this character, let's find a way to do more of him. And so that sort of annoyed me. Gamora's back. It's an old version, so it's undone all the character development, which, again, I'm not totally against it, because I benefit of the doubt. We'll see what they do in Guardians 3. And Vision, which, when they announced WandaVision, I pictured it ending sort of like it did, which didn't annoy me, because it's just sort of extending it and giving it more emotion. It's still the death sticks. So having that second Vision flying around, I'm sort of like, I don't know if I really want that.
Yeah.
Because leads to my favorite scene in the finale, which is when the Hex is collapsing, and so they have the moment with the 2 kids, which is lovely. And then that scene between Vision and Wanda is amazing.
Yeah.
Again, very similar to the one in the previous episode. The emotional state of those two, and a real.
It was good for Wanda to get closure. Yeah,
exactly. And Vision fully, that moment when they go, we've said goodbye before, so it stands to reason we'll say hello again. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Very touching scene. Really got me. I thought that was an amazing scene between those two. And if that's the last we see of Vision, I think that's the perfect end.
Of that version of Vision.
She's sort of reconciled this grief. She's got this more hopeful outlook. having properly said goodbye to Vision for herself and flying off like that, and the sort of the way he dissolved in her hands, so good. That seems so emotional and so good.
I echo those sentiments for sure. Yeah, because the other thing that I want to talk about from the finale is obviously her costume that she gets, and it's very reminiscent of the Sokovian fortune teller. But it's funny because obviously the Scarlet Witch, that's what we know she looks like in the comics, and adapting that costume into live action and making it look badass, I thought they nailed it. She looked so cool, so badass, and just like they did with Mysterio in Far From Home, they kept the essence of the costume, they made it work for live action, and it looks so good. So good.
Yeah, it's a good costume, and I like the thing that where she got it from for the Halloween episode. Like we said, all this stuff is being pulled out of her mind, being that's what she saw when she interacted with the Mind Stone and got her powers, and fully realizing that in the end battle with Agatha, looked exactly like what we saw in the previous episode when she saw it in the Mind Stone, was very cool. And I like that fight. That fight's, I know there's a lot of people talking about how it's sort of magic.
Oh, it's a CGI battle. What do you expect?
It's just throwing red things. But the rune thing, which my
Very cool.
brother picked up on before I did. As soon as Agatha went, huh, Adam went, the runes. She's made the runes on the wall. I went, yeah. It was very cool, and an immediate callback to what is for them like 10 minutes ago. But also that it made sense that's the whole point of that conflict is Scarlet Witch just has raw power.
She has no knowledge.
Yeah, and Agatha's like, you don't actually know magic, you just have magic. Give it to me because I know how to use it. And then that's that battle.
Well, that's where I feel like this show kind of really all comes to a head is in this moment where it's like, Wanda has this power, like you said, but she doesn't have the knowledge. And the introduction of the Darkhold into this was so satisfying because I don't know if you've watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
No, Oliver, I know that the Darkhold plays a big role in there.
In season 4 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we know a certain character has that book, and now we know Agatha has it. So the timeline of how that happens is really, really intriguing. But also the fact that they had a reference to that and brought that book back in was really cool. It looks a bit different. The book looks slightly different in WandaVision than it did in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the fact that it's still the same book is crazy. But what's most fascinating about this and why I think it sets up Doctor Strange too very interestingly is that final post-credit scene where we see Wanda isolating herself in the middle of nowhere, obviously because she should be facing repercussions for her crimes, essentially, right?
She's probably a bit scared too. She's gone, oh, I actually have all this really magic power.
Exactly.
I should stay away from people.
Well, yeah, definitely. But what kind of elevates this moment is that she's in her astral form, like we've seen Doctor Strange do when he's sleeping and stuff. But she is reading the Darkhold to not only understand more about herself, but to get answers that she wants to things that she shouldn't be getting answers to. And what's fascinating about the Darkhold, and people who have watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would know this, is that the Darkhold gives you unlimited knowledge of the universe and everything you want to know. And it gives absolute power, but absolute power corrupts, right? So now that she's reading the Darkhold, she will be corrupted as a result. And I don't know how they're going to handle this, whether she will be the antagonist of the Doctor Strange sequel or whether she will be teaming up with Doctor Strange and they'll be learning magic together. I have no idea how they're going to handle it. But regardless, reading the Darkhold is not a good thing. And now that Scarlet Witch, who's the most powerful creature, more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme,
which is an interesting phrase. And... well, I think because we saw in that... see, I don't know about... I've seen because the Darkhold looks so different, people speculating that maybe it's sort of starting to slightly decanonize Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
That's a fair theory, but I I hope that's not the
Because
case.
Agatha calls it the Book of the Damned, which is interesting because in that end credit scene, we hear the voice of her kids.
Exactly.
Asking
It's
for help.
the book is giving her something that she wants, but we know that can only lead to bad things.
Which is why I think the door is very much still open for someone like Mephisto. And I feel like that's definitely a way that Doctor Strange, because now Agatha was going, I can teach you. Now that obviously Agatha's an evil bitch and is now trapped as Agnes, which is a really off-putting moment for
it's
me.
cruel.
Yeah,
Very cruel.
she goes, "Whew," and then you see her doing this sort of
Again, it reinforces
video game glitch, sort of just saying these lines that don't fit in context at all. It's really creepy.
Well, it reinforces the fact that Wanda is not a good person.
Not always,
and that
no.
this power will turn her.
Yeah.
And I can't see it ending well, because that was the big thing about this show coming into it. Was I was expecting the show to end way differently than it did. The show kind of ends in a bittersweet note, and it kind of ends in a semi-satisfying way because of the way Wanda gets closure with Vision and the way those characters leave each other. But I was expecting this show to end on a huge cliffhanger, to be in turmoil, all be bad. Doctor Strange comes in and he has to be the savior. And then we go see that movie and it all makes sense. So this show ended with a lot more finality than I was expecting. And now, again, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, it'll be interesting to see how that movie continues this story and whether you will have needed to see WandaVision in order to fully understand that film, and how the story will interconnect will be, fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's something that Marvel's done very well, is keeping each story disconnected enough that they all stand alone.
But if you know and understand it, then it reinforces it.
You get bonus points for watching them all. But if you watch just WandaVision or just, pick any movie, Doctor Strange or whatever, you get a whole story, which is why part of the not alienating your audience, having that. You just want to watch WandaVision, then you get a whole story in WandaVision. They're not cheapening that to keep you coming back from it. You want a story? Here's a story. We'll tell you that there's more stories coming, but if you're done with this here, you've got a full satisfying story, which is why I think it was important. I would say it has an emotional ending. If you ignore post-credit scene, that emotional ending is perfect. They nailed it. That's closed. Clear character development. She's in a better space and all this. In terms of plot, with post-credits, they've still
set up
what
is to come.
I think it's a pretty near perfect balance of a full emotional story, but still hinting.
Well, that's what the
pushing
post-credits
forward.
are designed for, is
Exactly.
to set up the next thing, whilst the main story is to conclude, hopefully with finality by the end. So.
Yeah. So I liked that it ended.
Well, let's wrap this thing up. So, what were your final thoughts on WandaVision as a whole?
I really enjoyed it. I think they've nailed the TV format. I'm looking forward to where they go with it next. As I just said, the emotional story, very good, very touching, and very complete. Something I loved, with two characters I love, and a great emotional connection that we have seen before, but finally get to spend a lot more time with and see the full emotional depth that comes with that love that they have, that connection. I loved it. Doctor Strange is one of my favorite characters, so the ending pointing towards that I love. Obviously, there's a few red herrings, the engineer friend, a Quicksilver, that sort of don't go anywhere. But as I said before, I think if you're picking between setting up stuff and theorizing and stuff, and a solid emotional full story, you've got to go the story. The story always comes first, and they nailed it. So overall, I loved WandaVision.
I echo a lot of those sentiments, and I'm not going to repeat them because I think you've articulated my same thoughts very well. So
Yeah.
It's one of those shows that really focuses on character, and the characters are so compelling. And this is one of the things that I've said previously on my podcast that I have, and that Marvel cares so much and so deeply about these characters, and they have such a rich understanding of who they are and what makes them interesting to people who are reading comics, watching the cartoons, and now watching the MCU. They understand the characters, and characters are so important to the story you're telling. And I think that's why Marvel has been so successful with their cinematic universe, and why I think they will continue to be successful with their Disney Plus shows is because they focus on the characters, they tell a kick-ass story, and they're just damn entertaining projects. And I loved WandaVision as well. I think the show overall, if I'm being objective, I think it's a good show. I think it does what it sets out to do very well. It's very effective at so many things, and the performances overall I thought were fantastic. Again, Elizabeth Olsen was amazing. Paul Bettany, Kathryn Hahn, got to give shout out to her. She was fantastic as well. Someone else I want to give shout out to as well is Asif Ali, who plays Norm. He had very minimal scenes, but the scenes he was in was fantastic. That moment where Vision touches his forehead and he snaps out of it and then snaps back into it. So well done. Again, that's fantastic acting. That's very difficult to do. And I thought he nailed it.
Two very different personas equally well, both of them.
Yeah, so that was fantastic. And just the whole show just was really entertaining from start to finish. The fan engagement was fun to watch on Twitter week after week, even though I think Twitter is a cesspool. And I think we can all agree the true enemy of this show was the police stand by. I think that was the thing that at the end of every episode, as soon as it said police stand by, I think everyone week after week was like, no! So I think, that was definitely it was very fun watching this show week to week. And I think the format that Disney Plus is going with these shows, releasing them week to week, it makes these shows stand out more. They have longevity, and they create a conversation that we are now having and that so many people around the world are having, because not only was it a damn entertaining show, but, Disney, as much as they have their flaws, they do a lot of right. They do a lot of stuff right, and you got to give credit where credit is due. And I think Marvel has had another home run. So
it's great that that the audience is willing to dive into these TV shows, because it gives so many storytelling opportunities on quite a different format than your normal 2-hour movie.
Exactly.
And in Feige we trust.
In Feige we trust.
I'm
yes.
looking forward to what they do with this new format, because I have no doubt that they'll do some amazing stories moving forward. I think it's going to be great.
That concludes the conversation. Thank you very much, Sam, for coming on and discussing WandaVision with me.
Thank you for having me.
I know we've had so many discussions in the past about Marvel, and to do it on the hot mics, I'm so glad we finally did it. And hopefully those who are watching also enjoyed this conversation. Obviously, WandaVision, it was a very interesting show. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Obviously, make sure you hit that like button if you did enjoy this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure that notification button is turned on so that you never miss out on a future video. And there'll be more content coming to the channel soon, so make sure you are staying tuned. And thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in another time.